Questo è l'Extended Gameplay Breakdown with Obsidian di AVOWED. Io mi auguro con tutto il cuore che ci dia qualche riscontro godibile, gradevole, sostanzioso sulle caratteristiche del prodotto. E mi auguro vivamente che accresca ulteriormente il mio già abnorme hype nei confronti di un'opera che sembra condividere tanto col caro vecchio Skyrim, ma col twist appunto di Obsidian. Quindi, vediamo, iniziamo. Io sto però al solito per fare due chiacchiere, non arriverò alla fine per poi dare valutazioni alla fine, facciamo una cosa in corso d'opera.
From E to M. Hello and welcome back to the official Xbox podcast. My name is Tina Amini. I'm here with my fellow co-host Jeff Rubenstein, but we also have two very, very special guests for this very special, relatively shorter podcast episode. We have Carrie Patel here from Obsidian, as well as Gabe Paramo from Obsidian. Can you guys introduce yourselves just briefly, what you do at Obsidian and on Avowed?
My name's Carrie Patel. I've been at Obsidian for over 10 years now, and I'm the game director of Avowed.
My name is Gabe Paramo. I'm the gameplay director, and I've been at Obsidian for about 5 years.
Cool. We'll delve into those roles a little bit. But first, we're actually recording this a little behind the scenes here, right before the Dev Direct goes live. Like, how does it feel like you're just about to share Avowed with the world?
It's so exciting. I mean, I know the team has put so much hard work into this game, and we're going to get to see a little bit of that in some of the footage we're looking at today. And so it's really rewarding knowing all the love and polish that's gone into this to finally get to show people.
C'è un gameplay di genere di 10 minuti e credo sia meglio di sta roba. Dite? Qualcuno li ha visti entrambi? Chiedo per un attimo al volo. Perché qua possiamo avere un po' di insight da parte del team, che è una cosa. Mentre l'altro, diciamo che il gameplay puro non ci dice granché sulle letture del developer. Io sarei più propenso, magari andiamo alle parti quelle un attimino com'è strutturato. Anche secondo me è meglio questo, perché almeno ci spiegano qualcosina. Cioè vorrei avere qualche lettura magari del team.
Feel like you're just about to share Avowed with the world.
It's so exciting. I mean, I know the team has put so much hard work into this game, and we're going to get to see a little bit of that in some of the footage we're looking at today. And so it's really rewarding knowing all the love and polish that's gone into this to finally get to show people where Avowed is headed.
It was very cool being down at Irvine, filming with you guys for Developer Direct. So I got to be behind the scenes, and it was very fun to see the office, to see everybody busy working, but also excited to present about the game. And we're gonna, in just a minute, see actually some extended footage from the Developer Direct. So it's very exciting. But let's talk about Aora first, because we are in Aora. That's part of a world that you guys have built previously for the Pillars of Eternity universe. So we know that that's very Obsidian-like, of course, but in Developer Direct, you both talked about Obsidian's pedigree and like what makes Avowed a very Obsidian game. So what, aside from Aora and that context and building off of the Pillars universe, what would you both say makes it an Obsidian game?
For me, it's really about our player-centric approach to roleplay. Our studio's motto is "Your world's your way." And so the way we really approach choice and consequence and everything else is just giving players opportunities to define who they are in this world, how they want to behave, like just what fantasy, what challenges they want to undertake. And so with all of the content we design, whether it's quests, companion relationships, or gameplay, which Gabe can talk to, we really try to create this player-shaped whole so that we're always leaving room for players to really step in, drive the game and the story forward, and just define who they are in this setting.
Allora, questa cosa mi fa vibrare come poche al mondo, cioè il fatto che ogni volta che parlano sottolineino con forza e convinzione il principio delle scelte, delle conseguenze, della libertà decisionale, di approccio. Sì, finalmente qualcuno che usa le parole chiave che servono in un gioco così. Grazie Obsidian.
Yeah, from the gameplay perspective, right, if you look at Grounded is your world's your way. You get to build whatever world you want. In the context of Avowed, right, we've tried to lean into that with the gameplay mechanics and sort of let the player, through the loadout system, through what companions you can choose, through the abilities they can choose, they're throwable that they can select, right? Just what does the player want to do for combat, and being able to support that in as many ways as possible.
So in the Dev Direct, you kind of swoop through very quickly. There's a lot there to take in. So as Tina said, we have some extended footage here. And we're actually gonna, we're gonna bust out our telestrators and we're gonna pause and say, okay, well, what did we just see here? So why don't we roll some of that footage and let's get into it. All right, so tell us, where in the game is this area? How do you encounter it even?
So this is Shatterscarp, which is the third region in the game. But what we're exploring here is just one tiny little adventure space in one corner of the region.
And is this something you could even miss? Is this an optional area or something you're definitely going to hit?
It's absolutely missable. Discoverability and letting players be the authors of their own experiences, obviously very
Scusate un
important.
attimo.
Miss? Is this an optional area or something you're definitely going to hit?
It's absolutely missable.
No, ha detto il contrario. It's absolutely missable. Cioè è mancabile, non è imperdibile. Scusate, io sarà che ho la deformazione professionale dell'ex traduttore. Ha detto il contrario, cioè è un'area che effettivamente potremmo non vedere, che è fighissimo come principio. È assolutamente fighissimo. Peraltro, colgo l'occasione di questa pausa per dire un'altra cosa, cioè mi piace molto che Obsidian abbia in qualche modo svecchiato il suo approccio in termini di libertà, cioè fare un gioco Obsidian per le masse vuol dire non riuscire ad arrivare magari proprio al cuore del mercato. Loro hanno, da quello che sembra, applicato i principi di libertà tanto alla componente ruolistica, cioè decidi cosa fare, eccetera, quanto anche alla componente ludica, attraverso questa facilità nel cambiare loadout, equipaggiamenti, alternare gli stili di combattimento, per dare grande libertà anche in termini di combattimento puro e semplice. Qualcosa di, secondo me, assolutamente necessario per aprire un po' il pubblico e arrivare a più persone. Però il sangue è un po' bruttino così.
Discoverability and letting players be the authors of their own experience is obviously very important to us. So the content you're seeing here, the quests you're encountering, the little stories and nuggets of adventures you're finding, that's really for players who go out and seek it out.
So exploration gets rewarded, of course, and this is, from my understanding, a side quest too. So it's definitely something you can stumble on, decide to partake in or not. But I'm curious, who are these enemies? Because I feel like we just wandered into their territory and it's just a family having a good old time, and we're just killing them out of nowhere. So who are these enemies and why do we hate them?
Well, I don't think we hate them, actually. They're fine. It's more that they just don't really... There are Zorups, right? They're from Pillars of Eternity. They don't really speak a language that we can understand, but they're very territorial, right? So you've stepped on their space. They're trying to get back their territory in this area, and yeah, they're just gonna take down whatever gets in their way.
Can I just call it? We've confirmed swimming. Swimming is part of this game now.
Yep.
Confirmed. But speaking of enemies, as we're going through this area, I'm just curious, what are the other types of enemies that you might encounter, and what does that difficulty progression look like? Because I know we're about midway through here, but perhaps later in the game, what does that look like?
Well, we've shown off ogres, and we've shown off, big, scary-looking bears.
Yep.
But yeah, we have archetypes, right? So like healers and brute melee characters, brute range, people that are trying to use magic, melee attacks, right? So just a bunch of variety of enemies that you can fight and have to use the gameplay mechanics in order to defeat. Yeah.
So there was a lot of stuff in the combat that actually I want to go back to. So if we can back that video.
Devo dire che a me il combattimento ispira tanto, nel senso sembra un gioco effettivamente tanto divertente, che è la cosa fondamentale per un titolo così, cioè sembra effettivamente divertente combattere, sembra effettivamente divertente esplorare, parlano di un principio di gratificazione continua sull'esplorazione che dovrebbe essere uno dei fondamenti dell'esperienza. Io più lo guardo e più mi ispira, il problema è che non sappiamo quando arriva, ma ne parleremo.
Up and go back to that first encounter.
Speaking of gameplay mechanics.
Exactly. I have some questions here. Yeah. Okay. So you're armed. I see you immediately you pull out a sword and a shield. It looked like there was a parry move that the player uses here. Well, it's coming up here in a second. And then you're also charging the shield. Tell us about this.
Yeah, so what you're seeing here is our dual wielding system. Basically, the player has 2 loadouts, and you can put something in your offhand and a weapon in your primary hand, and we allow the player to mix and match one-handed weapons. And so right there, what you're seeing is your sword and board, right, going into it and trying to close the gap in the distance, and having the ability to parry with your shield. And power attack with your sword.
So there was a shielded enemy, and it felt like the sword and board stopped working. But then you also, right there, you pull somebody in, a little, get over here. Talk to us about some of the different skills and abilities.
Yeah, so that's one of our ranged units that basically is out in the distance. You're using Into the Fray, which is a mechanic to allow you to pull the enemy closer to you. Again, we have power attack. That's a blocker. That's essentially not your basic melee attacks are just not going to go through it. So you're going to have to use your power attack to be able to break their block.
Or you can swap to the wand if there's a shielded enemy, you're not getting through to them. So how often in the game do you find, maybe yourselves through the experience, I'm much more a magic player. I suspect I will be heading down like more of the wanded path, but clearly there's diversity with enemies and diversity in how you need to approach them. So can you talk about like how much you guys maybe in your play experiences have been swapping between them? Like what can we expect as players?
We definitely try to have these mechanics that are common amongst most weapons, but at the same time, try to give the space across all the different weapon types. So, if you're using the wand, there's a lot of homing going on there. There's a lot of it's magic damage. It's going through their armor and stuff like that.
That's why I like it.
Yeah, exactly. Versus, again, using a melee weapon where you're going to have to get closer to them. Yeah.
So a little bit personal stat.
Devo dire che trovare un giusto equilibrio fra le varie tipologie di combattimento non è concettualmente semplice. Sembra che abbiano raggiunto l'obiettivo in maniera piuttosto convincente, e trattandosi di un alfa mi sembra già un bel po' rifinito. Cioè, si nota che tante cose devono essere riviste, ottimizzate, perfezionate, quello che volete, però per essere un alfa devo dire che il livello è molto alto, al punto che non vorrei che fosse una beta con scritto sopra alfa, perché pare brutto metterci già beta, non lo so, però mi sembra più avanti rispetto a un alfa, onestamente.
A little bit like what are the enemies you're actually dealing with in that moment. Yeah.
One of the great things about the system that Gabe's team has been building, though, is it's very flexible, and it supports players mixing and matching between weapons, between ability trees. Respecking is, pretty easy for players who really want to try something different. So when I'm playing, I kind of love to follow my sense of curiosity, and sometimes.
Fermi, allora, la traduzione è veramente pessima, infatti sto cercando di guardarla per evidentemente a volte perfezionare un po' i concetti. Il respec, non il rispetto che c'era scritto, il respec sarà, a quanto dice, molto molto facile da fare, il che dovrebbe offrirci la possibilità di affrontare magari le situazioni cambiando radicalmente approccio in base al nostro gusto, in base al momento. Non so se per un gioco di ruolo di questo tipo mi piace l'idea di un respec al volo frequente, però tanta gente sicuramente apprezzerà.
Sometimes you'll find a new unique weapon with some pretty nice buffs on it, and maybe you'll decide to rock that for a while, even if it's not what you've been using previously.
So there is a skill tree in this game.
Yes.
Yes, there is.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
I love a good skill tree, so it's good to confirm that.
One of the things we've done in terms of skills in the tree is we've tried to, pillars as classes, right? We wanted to be able to grab as many abilities from the trees as possible, and sort of categorize them a little bit differently, so that the player doesn't feel like they're locked into a single choice at the start of the game. They can kind of mix and match, between different abilities, so you can get some you have some variety. You can choose to kind of commit to being a fighter, right, per se, but it's not an enforced kind of class setup.
And as Carrie said, you can respec if you don't like.
Exactly.
Ma perché no? A me queste sono le cose che mi fanno uscire da testa. Cioè, allora, è l'unica cosa che mi sta urtando nel discorso. Cioè, se io gioco a un gioco di ruolo e scelgo un certo tipo di percorso, la bellezza del gioco di ruolo sta anche nello scegliere un tipo di percorso che ti conduca verso scelte obbligate a un certo punto nella progressione, no? Cioè, io voglio fare un mago, non voglio poter fare anche il guerriero, voglio fare il mago. Al massimo, arrivati a un certo punto, mi puoi dare una spruzzata di altro, puoi offrirmi la possibilità di ibridare un po', ma non posso sentir parlare dal momento 1 di no, non vogliamo creare barriere, confini. È un gioco di ruolo, servono, e loro lo sanno bene, perché è quello che hanno sempre fatto, no? Cioè, li amiamo per quello. Non sacrificate anche voi tutto quello che rappresenta la ruolistica sull'altare del mercato di massa, vi prego, per pietà.
That direction
Yeah.
it went down.
Yeah.
I love that.
But there are definitely some pretty fun and wild combinations, like, you can do your traditional sword and board, or, play more of a magic wielder with a grimoire and a wand. But you can also take a pistol and a shield and just charge around the battlefield and fight characters at medium distance. And you can use some of the different abilities that you're seeing in this playthrough to support that flexibility.
And on that note, too, dual wielding wands. I probably mentioned this last time we were in an interview together for Showcase Extended, that I was so excited about it. And when I was down at Irvine, the team was very generous to let me play a very early build, and I got to experience the dual wielding wands. And it's so snappy and fun. It's exactly what I was thinking it would be. But I'm curious, because we're seeing a little bit of that now, where you have different spellcasting effects on each. So I imagine there's probably some really incredible combos. Have you seen some special combos yourselves, or maybe what testers have managed to pull off?
Yeah, definitely.
Che poi, precisazione doverosa, questa la voglio fare un attimo. Io preferisco di gran lunga, in questo tipo di impostazioni magari un po' più moderne, allora il respec libero mi piace. Respec libero mi piace perché non mi vincoli a dover perseguire necessariamente un tipo di percorso per tutta l'avventura, se magari a metà mi accorgo che quel tipo di cosa non mi piace, va bene. Però mi piace che a me personalmente, poi mi rendo conto che ognuno abbia il proprio gusto, mi piace molto il fatto che ci siano comunque delle strade chiare nell'evoluzione di un personaggio. Cioè io se sviluppo un mago, se sviluppo un guerriero, voglio avere le vibe di quel tipo di personaggio, voglio avere dei riscontri concreti mentre gioco che mi richiamino quel tipo di personaggio. Non voglio poter creare un mago che in realtà è più bravo con la spada, spero che gli venga data un sistema magari simile a quello che si è visto in Cyberpunk da questo punto di vista, dove comunque delle ibridazioni sono possibili ma non troppo marcate, cioè non si deve superare secondo me un certo tipo di confine, perché altrimenti diventa, cioè altrimenti rischi di rendere vana e poco percepibile, poco significativa la scelta del giocatore verso un certo tipo di percorso, andando a rovinare anche il principio stesso dell'idea di rigiocarlo. Spero di aver fatto capire un po' il pensiero, perché è una sfumatura sottile, difficile da comunicare, ma secondo me è significativa.
So, with Into the Fray, you could use like a fireball ability that creates like an AoE on the ground, right? And then pull the enemy into the fire,
I love
and
it.
they get
Devious.
on fire. But in terms of the wands, right? Like what you're seeing there is a sort of enchanted wand, and there are potentially other elements that you can maybe find. But Pillars is really known for their unique weapons and the unique permutations of enchantments that you can kind of see on them. So yeah.
So in this particular area, I did also get to play through this part, and first I realized you need to take out the healer first, otherwise it's like going down an up escalator. You're not making a lot of progress.
That's a good way to put it.
This is where I found that you really start to put these things together. So you froze that larger enemy. So sort of talk about some of these elements and how you can even use them outside of combat.
Yeah, so we have an elemental system where you can light guys on fire, you can freeze them, you can shock them. We have objects in the world that the player can interact with. They're not just on weapons, right? They're not just on wands, right? You might find something with a sword that has it, right? Certain abilities might cause elemental damage. Also, your companions themselves, could have potentially some damage there.
There was something when I had gotten to play where I wandered somewhere else and ran into an area that was gated off, and I was able actually to use that freeze to help to progress in the exploration.
Yes, yeah. And so we have objects like that. We also have, maybe being able to burn brambles. Yeah.
Yeah, you can destroy barriers to find new areas to explore. You can freeze paths in the water to maybe reach ledges that you can't normally.
Questo è molto figo, ragazzi. L'interazione elementale, non elementare come c'era scritto, elementale con il contesto è bellissima. Cioè, il fatto che stiano costruendo e quindi il level design debba risuonare con la possibilità di interagire con percorsi che magari si aprono solamente a fronte di una certa abilità, tipo ghiaccio e lago e ci passo sopra. Se non ho quell'abilità non potrei farlo. Quello è fighissimo, ragazzi. Quello è fighissimo. Perché apre una marea di prospettive all'esplorazione e ci potrebbe far sentire ovunque sempre col dubbio del ma se avessi questa abilità magari potrei fare questa cosa, potrei fare quell'altra, quindi si innesta quel sistema, quel meccanismo mentale del voglio rigiocare sta cosa con un altro personaggio. Bello, mi piace.
Lots of fun options there.
And a lot of what we saw, like we saw a Tanglefoot ability, for instance, which was really cool because when you're freezing an enemy, you're totally freezing them. But when you're trapping them with the Tanglefoot ability, like ranged attackers can still get you. So there's a lot of nuance there that as a player you have to consider. But also a lot that was built off of the Pillars of Eternity universe. Like Tanglefoot is directly associated from those games. So I'm curious, like, how did you guys hone in on these abilities? Like, what are the combos you were thinking about? Anything that you brought over and maybe changed or made new too?
Yeah, so for Tanglefoot, but because in an action first-person game, it's all about movement and trying to like crowd control. For Tanglefoot, right, it's about also creating space. So we already had freezing. You're crowd controlling that way, but with Tanglefoot, it's a little bit unique where they're rooted, and so they don't move, but they can still do attacks. So it's about trying to find that balance where you're not overpowering the enemy, and there's again choice and consequence for these mechanics, so that the player just doesn't like just stomp everybody all the time, you know. So
well, let's go back a little bit because we got an opportunity to talk about that very Obsidian style depth and breadth of gameplay. I have watched the developer direct so many times, I've memorized all of your guys' lines, so that is directly lifted from there. But there's another very Obsidian element to Avowed, which is branching dialogue and how you make choices within the story too. And Carrie, you alluded to some consequences potentially if you make one decision or another, but it's again very much like playing your own way. So can you talk about just how impactful like those choices that you make are and that branching dialogue and how that can result in different paths for the player?
Absolutely. So again, for us, creating these choices like the big ones that affect the outcome of a quest or, you know, the well-being of certain characters or communities are just as important as the smaller choices that you make in navigating a dialogue and kind of, you know, in subtle ways influencing your relationship with another character. But all of it is really centered around letting the player be the main character in this setting. And so what we're seeing here is, you know, the players, they've been exploring this grotto. They're finding the bodies of these dead soldiers and kind of picking up pieces of a story along the way. And so here they finally found the survivor and talking through them about what happened and getting a little bit more information. So there is a moment that's going to come up after this where the player can confront the guy who ran away and make a pretty impactful choice with him about how they decide to navigate that conversation. And they can either, it's very obvious that this guy was in over his head, and then they can either sympathize with him and console him a little bit, or challenge him for his cowardice and for the way he abandoned his unit. And the way the player navigates that conversation definitely has big consequences for how that encounter plays out.
So you mentioned your player being the main character, but they're not the solo character. We see in this conversation Giada and Kai, I want to say. Can you tell us about the relationship with companions and how they interact both in the story and in gameplay?
Sure. So, you know, your companions are your traveling partners in your journey through the Living Lands. They all have deep ties to different regions of the Living Lands, and they all have their own personal reasons for wanting to ally with the player and help them resolve the big conflicts that you're encountering over the course of the game. So they're your allies, in some ways your advisors, your local guides, and they provide a lot of additional commentary and context that reveals something both about their character, but also about the corner of the world that you're exploring. And Kai in particular has a pretty deep history with Shatterscarp that comes out a little bit over the course of this quest as he starts to see how the region and the people have changed in his absence and maybe where he let them down. But obviously they're also your allies in battle, and that's something that Gabe can speak to.
Yeah, so for the companions, we wanted to make sure that they had their role in the combat systems. And so, you know, again, like I talked about, Kai can help you with the burning brambles, and Giada is healing, right? And so Kai's kind of your tank. he has an ability that's called taunt, or it's not called taunt, but it's a taunt, and a taunt allows you to basically make the enemy take aggression from them and start to focus on Kai, and then Giada can have the ability to heal your party.
Trovo meraviglioso che stiano parlando dell'abilità provocazione di questo personaggio in un momento in cui il personaggio non riesce a farsi guardare dal boss. No, a parte tutto, trovo che stiano facendo una panoramica molto interessante sul gioco in questo momento. Il fatto che i personaggi abbiano questa componente molto predominante e siano molto centrali nell'avventura al punto da non essere una parte secondaria rispetto al protagonista è fighissimo. Mi auguro che abbiano fatto un lavoro realmente all'altezza di queste parole, perché se dovessero veramente rivelarsi veritiere, concrete, riscontrabili, cavolo, saremmo di fronte a un gioco davvero, davvero notevole. Io ragazzi, sarà che, vi dico la verità, è dai tempi di Mass Effect 2 che non riesco a trovare un gioco che mi faccia, a parte Baldur's Gate 3, provare una sensazione di reale empatia, legame forte, trasporto emotivo con dei personaggi. Baldur's Gate 3 lo ha fatto, ma parliamo di un gioco in un certo modo. In prodotti così più improntati sull'azione pura, non mi ricordo un gioco che mi abbia fatto vibrare tanto quanto Mass Effect 2. Quindi, siccome Obsidian, in termini di scrittura di un universo ruolistico, è molto brava, e credo che qui sia anche importantissimo e ne trarranno un beneficio abnorme il fatto di aver potuto prendere il mondo di Pillars of Eternity come base, ci sono buone possibilità che il gioco in questo senso faccia molto 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 bene.
So yeah, just they have impact in combat as well. Yeah.
Should we assume there will be other companions throughout the game as well?
Yes, you'll meet a couple more. Kai and Giada are just two of them.
Okay. I just know Obsidian known for some pretty great companions.
I was going to say the
years.
same thing. Yeah, exactly. It's certainly an expectation. But you mentioned Shadowscarp. I'm already really sad for Kai, and I already want to console him because I feel like there's some history to uncover there. But what is Shadowscarp? That's obviously where we are in this mission, in this extended footage that we've been seeing from Developer Direct. What is the context to Shadowscarp that we should know?
Yeah, so as you can see, it's a very arid environment. A lot of the locals who have settled here are originally from Rawatai, which returning Pillars players will recognize as kind of this very fun but somewhat militaristic culture, which Kai originally comes from as well. So you've got this sort of very hardy little settlement on the cliffs overlooking the coast called Thirdborn. But what the player encounters here is a ramp up in tensions between their people, the Adiran Empire, and the locals, again, here primarily settled around Tyans, as everybody's sort of trying to negotiate some conflicts that are taking place and starting to grow in the Living Lands. You're also seeing the stronger effects of something called the Dream Scourge, which is this spiritual plague that you've been sent here to investigate. And just to add into that mix, we've also got an archmage who has taken up one corner of the map and created her own little frozen labyrinth there. So there are a lot of different characters, a lot of different tensions to navigate and that the player's going to get to encounter here.
Carry stop.
Due cose. Allora, parlava del fatto che ci sarebbero un altro paio di companion. Ora, avrà detto un altro paio di companion sotto forma di battuta perché in realtà ce ne sono tipo altri 10 o perché saranno tipo 4 in tutto? Punto di domanda. Ma al di là di questo, la mia speranza profonda è che le quest reagiscano dinamicamente ai companion che ci porteremo. Quella per me è una cosa fondamentale, sarà un elemento dominante per la qualità dell'esperienza rolistica. Io voglio vedere contesti reagire ai miei compagni in modo tale che la storia possa prendere determinati percorsi o vedersene interrompere altri in base alle scelte fatte in termini di parti. Lì spero che ci sia realmente qualcosa che può essere possibile o totalmente impossibile in base a chi te porti appresso. Questa è una cosa che ci terrei tanto, dico la verità. E Obsidian credo che sia pienamente in grado di fare qualcosa di convincente.
Stop, you're saying too much.
So we're noticing just with the player, they're mantling their way through. It's a very vertical area, and there was actually one part of the footage where they look down and there's enemies there, and they choose not to engage. So if you could just talk about like the size of this area and just like how that affords the ability to like choose even just what to engage with and what not
Your
to.
literal path.
Yes.
Yeah, so it's like it's open zone, right? So comparable to Outer Worlds areas on the larger side, and multiple paths essentially to be able to tackle combat situations
Or avoid them.
Or
I
avoid
suppose.
them. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, this area is entirely discoverable, which means it's also entirely missable. And I really want to give a shout out to Tyler McCombs, who's the area designer who set up the little grotto we're exploring. As you mentioned, there's a wonderful sense of verticality, just a lot of wonderful nooks and crannies to explore, and that's something that we really wanted to take advantage of, and also set up, as Gabe mentioned, really fun combat encounters around that let you either just jump in, charge right in, or take a more tactical and measured approach. And you see that even in this first combat that you encounter when you dive through that skull's mouth and you come up out of the water. Our playtester here takes the rightmost path, which is the sneaky one, but you can also just, Leroy Jenkins your way up the middle and just jump right into the fray.
I love that. Well, we got so much additional detail in this podcast. Really appreciate you both joining us. But before we wrap up, we have just a couple more questions too. Developer Direct is like an interesting show for us because we hand over complete reins to the developers, wanting to give you all an opportunity to talk about the craft, the very obsidian craft in your guys' case, that goes into the game and how the team thinks about things when you're putting things together. So I'm just curious to hear a little bit more about that kind of team culture, and also both of your roles. Like, how do they integrate? What does a creative director do? What does a gameplay director do? And what's your day-to-day working together like to bring this game together to life?
Want to start?
Sure. So as the game director on the project, I'm responsible for setting out the vision and helping to guide the team in all of our different efforts towards that, and make sure that we're really building a cohesive and exciting player experience. And both the joy and the challenge of that is, RPGs are so feature rich and so content rich. We have so many different systems supporting our combat, our exploration, and then there's the way we build quests, the way we seed them through the world, the way we try to nudge players towards them without being too heavy-handed about it. And so, I'm always trying we're always trying to balance how these elements work together to, again, create an experience that's cohesive and consistent, but also allow room for surprises and nuance and fun, and not get so precious about the dogma of what we're building that we don't allow for those expressions of creativity and those things that, we as developers love to create and we know players are going to love to find.
Yeah, as my role as gameplay director, I'm trying to direct a team for that's kind of more revolved around conversations, exploration, and combat. Right, that's kind of the big overseen parts of the game, and just working with Carrie to just make sure that we're following our pillars.
If you will.
Yeah, exactly.
No pun intended.
Yeah, exactly. Following our pillars, and having little back and forth fights, right? About whether the blocker should be holding a shield or the blocker should be holding a spear.
You were absolutely right, by the way.
But yeah, just making sure that we're working together to be able to get the gameplay features that are fun, make sure it fits in the lore, make sure it fits part of the world, make sure we're not doing anything that's maybe doesn't fit within the Obsidian brand, right? Like things that are mechanics that are too binary, right? And more a little bit more. Less black and white and a little bit more like how RPG players would like them to be. So yeah.
And one of the great things about our studio culture is, so many of us are RPG fans, and I feel like one of the real strengths of being a mid-sized developer is we are, just large enough to be ambitious with the gameplay and the content we build, but also, small enough that we can still be nimble and again, still, allow people to take big swings. And the Leviathan Hollow that we see in this this playthrough is a really great example of that. Originally, it was scoped to be much smaller, and again, we found that the area designer Tyler, who was working on that, had a schedule, things were going great, and so his producer and his lead kind of, looked at the schedule and said, yeah, if you want, you've got time to make something more out of this. And we've got an excellent showpiece here that, again, is, a wonderful combination of, strong planning and coordination on the production side, to be sure, but also just some really great initiative, from the team.
So there's something I've been wondering since...
Comunque, raga, allora, una cosa da dire è lavorare in un contesto in cui alle spalle hai Microsoft, probabilmente rende tutto un po' più semplice da certi punti di vista, e questa ultima dichiarazione ne è un po' la prova, del tipo, ma sì, dai, fai quello che ti va. Cioè, è un lusso che non sempre lo sviluppatore medio può in qualche modo approfittare, no? Può utilizzare, di cui uno sviluppatore può godere, ecco. Però il discorso è una riflessione volante che mi è venuta adesso. Allora, le somiglianze con Skyrim sono tante, concettualmente, e mi spaventa un po' questo fatto, perché Avowed è un titolo sicuramente molto interessante, ma non so se abbia l'ambizione di ridefinire un po' quello che ha fatto Skyrim, e mi preoccupa che il mondo possa aspettarsi da Avowed il ridefinire quello che ha fatto Skyrim. Cioè, sembra per certi versi un progetto molto più, non voglio dire modesto, però meno ambizioso di quello che fu Skyrim ai suoi tempi. Un prodotto molto più in una certa comfort zone, se vogliamo, concettualmente parlando. E non vorrei che questo si rivelasse un problema a livello mediatico per la produzione. Cioè, parliamo di un progetto che secondo me soddisferà in pieno le aspettative dei fan del genere. Io da quello che ho visto mi sento assolutamente soddisfatto e sereno all'idea di giocarci quando sarà. Non sono, è una delle poche volte in cui non sono preoccupato di ritrovarmi per le mani qualcosa che sia diverso da come me lo sto immaginando. Zero. Cioè, sono certo che quando ci giocherò dirò, oh ecco, è precisamente quello che mi aspettavo. Però mi preoccupa il modo in cui il pubblico potrebbe reagire a un gioco così, aspettandosi chissà che cosa, perché magari Obsidian non la conosce, e rimanendo deluso da quello che mai sarebbe potuto arrivare da Obsidian o da un progetto così presentato in questo modo. Ora è chiaro che stiamo facendo un discorso che è più sulla comunicazione, sul marketing che sul game design, però gioco forza al giorno d'oggi siamo costretti a fare discorsi che implichino entrambi gli argomenti. Comunque.
Avowed was first revealed a few years back with that teaser, and that is like, what can we glean from the title? When I think of like Avowed, like you can vow revenge, you could be avowed enemies. It feels like very personal. I'm just curious, like what we can take away from the title as we. I want more right now, but this is all we're going to get today. Yeah. But just what can we be thinking about here?
So I won't say too much this time, Gabe, but so as the player character, you're the envoy. So you're a representative of the Adirian Empire. You are the personal representative of the Emperor himself, and you're sent here on this mission to investigate the spiritual plague. So on the one hand, you're vowed to the Emperor and the Empire that you serve, but while you're in the Living Lands, you might discover another unique connection to something else that's very close to you. So this game is very much about choosing your loyalties and choosing what matters most to you. And that's all I'll say about this.
All right. Well, I know what matters most to me is getting to play this game. We'll talk more about that, but we will hear a little bit more because coming up, I want to say this Sunday, Carrie, you're going to be on Drop Frames with JP
Vabbè,
and Co.
Ragazzi, direi che è sufficiente. Rimane quello che ho detto, nel senso è un titolo assolutamente interessante, prospettive molto intriganti, ma proporzioni ridotte rispetto a quello che tanti secondo me si immaginano. Gli ambienti mi sembrano molto, molto articolati, ma non così vasti, e di riflesso mi sembra un progetto molto curato nel dettaglio ma senza voler esagerare, che ripeto per me è assolutamente un lato positivo, è una qualità, citazione di Boris, ma credo che sarà importante per loro farlo ben presente, riuscire a farlo percepire nel corso del tempo, perché altrimenti ci ritroveremo forse in una situazione simile a quella vissuta con Cyberpunk al lancio, in cui la gente era arrabbiata perché non era GTA. Qui la gente deve capire che non è il nuovo Elder Scrolls, che è un'altra cosa, fatta da un altro team, con altri obiettivi, con altre prospettive, con altro tutto. Ecco, per cui questi mesi saranno fondamentali a livello comunicativo perché a livello di game design stanno lavorando secondo me alla perfezione. Ecco, questo è quello che ho da dire sinceramente su AVOWED. Curiosissimo di sapere cosa ne pensate voi.